It's 22 minutes before 7 o'clock. Welcome back. You're still watching Morning Live on this Monday morning. Now, this is not going to deter me, and I'll take full responsibility. These were some of the words that were used by Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa last night while addressing ANC branches in West Rand, hot on the heels, of course, of a Sunday Independent story alleging multiple extramarital affairs, and some of them apparently with university students that he's supporting financially. Two senior journalists have called the story pre-summer hot air and weekend dull respectively, but the Gauteng ANC Sefako Makgato branch has come out to say one of the women being depicted in the story is a branch member who's seeking advice on how to respond to the fabrication. Political analyst Dr. Somadoda Fikeni joins us now from Pretoria via Skype. Prof, good morning to you and thank you so much for coming through.
Good morning to you and good morning to your viewers.
Thank you so much, Prof. Let's first get your perspective on the story and the emails and their origins, of course.
Well, I do think that there are two things that ought to be separated. The indiscretion of having a relationship with younger people within a marriage situation, as well as the political context and the environment within which this is taking place, including the timing and how these were found or dug out. So those are the two narratives that we ought to take into account. And then the third one is to say, going backward, taking different cases from Bill Clinton to Donald Trump to Berlusconi, to President Jacob Zuma and many other political figures, it does look like the impact of personal life doesn't seem to be as decisive as the one of public morality, such as the use of public resources.
Yeah, and the DP himself even said so, Dr. Fikeni, yesterday, that this has happened before in the ANC. It has happened in 2007. It has happened before. But I think the main question really here, is it going to sort of daunt his image and his aspirations as the president of the ANC?
Not in a big way, but of course you do have that small margin of people who are socially conservative, who take the issues of personal morality quite seriously. They may actually feel disappointed and they may feel discouraged, but in the end, though, as the mud goes back and forth against each faction, it might end up diminishing the ANC in its entirety, where people may start despairing to say, you have no good leaders. Or it may even lead to the diminishing of legitimacy of political figures in general.
Yeah, and some people, of course, are applauding her for the fact that he has alluded to one relationship that he says he was able to deal with it with his wife and they've put everything behind them. What are your thoughts on his admission that indeed he was in an extramarital relationship?
Well, I do think that these things have to be expected. Power, authority and money has a tendency of leading to these kinds of things because people do have a disproportionate power and influence over the people who are less, fortunate in a sense. So to that extent, you have come to expect these here and abroad, which is very unfortunate in a sense. But that in itself, I do think that, especially in politics, has come to be something quite common.
But when we look on the political side of things, Dr. Fikeni, do you think this scandal will affect the Deputy President in his political career?
If those who are pressing on and using it keep pressing, then he might actually begin to have the solidarity of victimhood, which happened to the current president in the past, that the timing and also the political use by the political opponents of these things begin to reinforce the notion that you may have the political or even the government hand behind it. But if he takes full responsibility and he clears the air in good time, then surely he stands a chance of being forgiven and moving forward. Of course, the fact that this seemed to be happening at the time when you are so close to elections will raise the question of political factors.
All right. And there are reports, you talk about an issue of timing, Dr. Fikeni. There are reports that the Deputy President was warned about a dirty war that was escalating. Can we expect worse than this? I mean, many political analysts are saying that we should expect mudslinging and smear campaigns to intensify, a few months before the elective conference of the African National Congress.
Without any doubt, the same way we've seen the veracity of other claims, especially those who may want to push back, saying that they are under siege over the state capture issue, they are under siege over the issue of the state-owned companies' allegations of irregularities, because that seemed to have affected mainly one faction. They may want to dig, they may want to throw back and say, after all, everyone, as Batabi Dlamini once said, has a smaller nyana skeleton. So to that extent, the issue of relative morality is coming to play as a political factor.
But what's the best way for the Deputy President to get to the bottom of the story so it doesn't affect his campaign and as well as his political ambitions? What should he do?
I think just being straightforward, explaining what was happening and assuring people that this has stopped, and then focusing on the campaign itself, and in the campaign still trying to press on the issues of, the use of public resources. That in itself, I think he could salvage his campaign in a stronger way.
Mm-hmm. We've seen and heard of the so-called ANC factions, and yesterday we saw the Deputy President being flanked by the likes of Mike Mabuya Kulu, who was removed from the leadership of the KZN as the MEC. We've also seen the former ANC Womens League President, Angie Motshekga, with him, knowing that the ANC Womens League is currently behind Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma. What do we read in all of this, Dr. Fikeni?
It simply indicates that you do have fragmentation within the ANC and within the Women's League itself. It also indicates that KZN is not as united as many would have thought. It is fragmented, and Senzo Mchunu, the former chairperson of the province, together with the likes of Cele and others, are not part of this one bloc presented by the province. So the size of the province, if it is fragmented, doesn't become a decisive factor.
All right. Now, going back to the issue, of course, of these leaked emails, we've seen the DP losing his court bid to stop the newspaper from publishing the story. What is your take on that? What is that saying?
Well, I don't think it was well advised for him to go and challenge the story in the last minute, because that becomes a headline as well, as though he wanted to hide something. He ought to have just placed his narrative and let the story go, because in South Africa, stories don't go away merely because you try to stop them in the court. They are leaked and so forth. And it also creates an impression that there is something bigger. But if you let the story do its round and you simply present your counter narrative or the context thereof, then it has a shorter shelf life than when you try to challenge it.
Yeah, and if one was to look at the statement issued by the presidency, of course, it appeared to be sort of verifying that indeed the emails were the Deputy President's personal email correspondence, but they were obtained unlawfully.
Well, in terms of how things get obtained in this country, you remember the intelligence report that enabled the president to be absolved by NPA. That intelligence report, up to this day, there was no clarity as to how it was obtained, but it seemed to have been used by the NPA. And currently you do have the emails that are making rounds. So the issue of the sources increasingly in these political battles doesn't seem to matter anymore. Maybe in terms of their admissibility to courts, they may matter, And that in itself is the state of our society. And it raised the question of whether the cyberspace itself is a secure environment, as many people believe. And therefore, it raises the question as to whether people should actually be entertaining the idea that their conversations, whether on the phone or over the emails or even documents being circulated, are secured in any form.
Yeah, that's a discussion for another day. But then yesterday when he was in the East End, Dr. Fikeni, he kept emphasizing that state resources should not be used to discredit certain leaders. What are we reading from that statement, particularly about state resources?
I would simply say it's a deja vu feeling. We have had this before, Polokwane, and it looks like it has become a tradition. If people were standing up against the use of state resources before, I think right now it has come back on steroids. Literally, it has doubled up. One lesson is that once you allow for state resources to be used in political battles, it becomes a recurring process. It simply reincarnates itself into different forms. And those who might have been critical of this use of state resources might find themselves being on the other side. And that in itself is something that our laws and law enforcement has to take another look at, because the use of state resources tend to weaken the state itself to deliver on its core mandate and focus on things which are quite trivial, like intra-party political battles.
All right. No, we'll leave it at that. But just a quick one on this one, Dr. Fikeni. Would you personally say that now we are starting to see the beginning of a dirty war for the ANC presidential hopefuls?
Well, it had begun a long time ago. It will simply gain some traction and intensity right now. And you may see more even with the other candidates who are coming to the fourth, who are being endorsed. You'll see this mudslinging back and forth. But most important, though, will be on the cases and allegations which are coming up, the timing of those cases being resuscitated, the sequence of them, and what is being prioritized and not prioritized. That in itself will also be another indicator of how law enforcement is compromised or is involved in this whole exercise.
All right. Dr. Fikeni, we'll leave it at that, but thank you so much for your insights. We appreciate it. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much. Dr. Somadoda Fikeni, they're giving us an analysis on a story, of course, that broke over the weekend on Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa and allegations of multiple affairs, with some believing it and other, of course, crying political mudslinging. So, yeah, that's the issue that broke, of course, over the weekend.